Okay. I think we're on the air, but hopefully people will be able to find us because, if the old version of the show that I just did a few minutes ago is actually still going, kind of, or suspended, people might be over there instead of finding the new header and coming over to see us. So,
is this a Star Trek episode?
It's Groundhog Day, actually.
Yeah. Time, space, continuum. What's going on here, Tom?
Yeah, no kidding. That is something that's never happened to us before on Spreaker.com. So, who knows? Okay. All right. No new news yet from Lisa as far as that goes. There's Tanya. There she is. Okay. Tanya and Lisa found us. So, okay, we're actually going to do the Groundhog Day version of the show. And I'm going to hit the button again, and here we go.
And now for something completely different.
Humans do have an amazing capacity for believing what they choose.
I think before we go around killing people, we had better make dance here of our evidence.
They lied to you. It's time to learn the truth.
You can't handle the truth! From what was once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
Okay, what do you do? Groundhog Day. Well, how did that movie go, Brad? Remember every morning he woke up, wasn't his alarm going? Isn't that how the next day?
I think it was Sonny and Cher in the background.
Yeah, it might have been. Anyway, welcome everybody to this edition again to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. How's that?
Yeah. But how did they know that it's again?
Yeah.
So,
well, the ones that were in the chat room on the previous version of the show do.
Well, there you go. You spilled the beans.
Yeah, I'm a bean spiller. Sorry.
All right.
Hopefully this thing's still working. So now, everything looks like, the screen didn't go blank like it did last time. So hopefully we're still here.
Let's hit it. Let's be radio professionals.
Sweet. Let's try that for once, huh?
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, well.
All right. Well, we're going to welcome everybody again to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. My name is Brad. I'm joined by my very good friend, Tom. And maybe we're going to have a secret guest trigger lately. I don't know.
Yeah, he may show up. Who knows?
All right. Well, maybe if he shows up, we'll get him to talk. That'd be even bigger.
Yes, that would be.
So we're going to discuss a number of things, and Tom was just talking to us about the show's overview. Yeah. But I think we're going to touch on the presidential campaign in Greece and
a Korean defector.
Korean defector.
Yeah,
I like it.
So, anyway, what I wanted to get to, I've had a number of discussions, I guess I always do, on a daily basis almost with people, and the part of the argument becomes, in essence, why they think I support liberty, and I think most people think I do just because I think it's a better idea. Again, maybe I'll be richer if that happened. Whatever, right? There's some advantage, and there certainly is. I'm not arguing there isn't. There is, of course, a giant advantage, the biggest possible advantage. But I think most people see it as much more concrete and maybe issue-oriented. That's why I or anybody else would do what they do, in supporting liberty. I wanted to address that. This whole monologue is actually a weird monologue to say, because to say that I support liberty, to me, is parallel in saying I support gravity, right? There's kind of no sense in saying that you support gravity because gravity exists whether I support it or not. It doesn't need my support, right? And that's, for me, the way I look at things. That's why it's a weird thing to say that I support freedom. And the only way that it's unweird right? It's taken away a little bit is because, again, I think many people support freedom, but they're actually supporting tyranny, but they're using the rhetoric and the words of freedom. So they think they're supporting freedom, but they actually are not. They're supporting tyranny, right? So part of what I want to do is on this show, and I think hopefully we do, is to alert people that, as to that what liberty is and what they're actually supporting is something else. I think they don't even know.
I think that broadly this is a hard subject. Because you've got to take yourself out of almost your own place, your own mentality, and look at yourself almost from afar or out of your current role in what you're saying.
Yeah, yes, it's difficult for the listener because they see a lot of what I say as critical, criticizing, condemning. I don't know, looking down on. I don't know what all adjectives may apply to people. But I get the sense that people have that I know something you don't, so I feel superior to you, right? All those, I don't know, all the different possible feelings that people could have, and that's not the case. What I'm really just arguing is that not only you, I would say we, because I certainly have been misinformed throughout my life up until the last 15 years, and that's what I really think it is. It's misinformation, and you can go beyond that, and I always do. I was going to say sometimes I do. We've all been indoctrinated, and that's, I think, is where your words really apply there, Brad. That people don't realize, and of course they don't realize they've been indoctrinated. Right? If you realized you were indoctrinated, you would no longer be indoctrinated. And then the next thing, when I get to that, people think, oh, so you're telling me there's this giant conspiracy of people trying, to pull the wool over my eyes. And the answer to that, in my view, is yes and no, right? Because what I'm saying is most people just repeat what they've heard, right? It's kind of understood, so... And they also believe in carrying out tradition, essentially. The way it is the way it should be, right? So it's just kind of about a habit that it continues. Okay, and I'm here to break your habits, I guess, especially what I'll call your bad habits. I had to go through the process myself, no doubt, and it was earth-shattering process for me. It was a confidence wrecking. It was a number of things that really got to me. But it is a difficult process, and I do agree with you, Brad. To some degree, you have to look at yourself objectively rather than in the situation, and that's really what I wanted to address. That, and you say, well, then how was I able to see this? Well, the real answer is I'm not sure. I never know what, if I am in a discussion with someone, what I say that actually becomes earth-shattering to them or insignificant. Right? I just try to get the information to people as many ways as I possibly can, and hopefully one of them kind of sticks or one of them resonates, right? Because I think it's really different with everybody. So it's hard to say, well, if I just gave you the straight shot and say this is what it is, it doesn't resonate with a lot of people. But here's the issue, and I had this conversation a little while back, is, I just say freedom is rooted in the nature of man, right? And then people will ask me, well, who gets to determine what the nature of man is? Well, nobody gets actually to determine it. It just gets revealed to us because people are just trying to attempt to describe the nature of man, right? Just like we don't get to, define gravity. We just try to describe what it is and how it behaves on us and all those things and predict it when we use it in physics, right? We say, well, this is what's going to happen to this thing because we understand gravity. And if we do, our predictions would be right. If we don't, predictions are wrong. So, I ask people to do this. I say, consider this as a legal reference. You are the sole owner of you, right? And some people go, well, yes, obviously I am. And I would argue, well, what you just did was affirm that you are the owner of you because you expressed it. If you couldn't express it, then you might not be a self-owner. But here's the problem. Even the reverse is true. If you say, no, actually, I'm not the sole owner of me, well, then you still are expressing self-ownership in order to do it, right? You're caught in a performative contradiction, right? There is no other answer is the point, right? Why? And the answer is because it is part of your nature. It's an axiomatic statement. It's undeniable. It's just true. Again, you could say it's not true, but that doesn't make it not true. It just is. And that's one of the ways that I try to show people that your freedom, your nature, which is, again, to be a self-owner, is just what I said, inherent in nature. It's undeniable, not logically. Of course, you can be illogical and say, no, I'm not a self-owner, but again, it would be illogical to do so. So everything that falls out from that, basically from that, there's kind of two starting points, but just say for the moment, that starting point, everything that we do is kind of we deduce logically from that. And that's how we try to analyze some of these news stories that we're going to be talking about this evening, right? It's comes from that. So that's part of the thing that last time, and the same thing I have, that we ask that, you listen critically to what we have to say. And if you think we're saying something that's inconsistent with that, with self-ownership or with the non-aggression axiom, which is another thing I didn't describe tonight, then we really welcome those questions. And sometimes we can give better clarity to the listeners, and other times we can learn something ourselves because, in fact, we make mistakes. So that's really what I wanted to address, to people, that to really think about this. And it's very difficult to think about this, but why does this backtrack to something that's undeniable? I would call that a strong foundation, and that strong foundation is, in fact, man's nature. Some people call it natural law, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's very important because the starting point is a rock solid foundation that is undeniable. Whereas other philosophies just start, I would argue, kind of from a whim and say, we should treat all people nicely. Well, of course we should. I'm not arguing that, but I'm just saying, what's your basis for that? And this is what's different. We have an undeniable basis for essentially the entire argument that is the show. So that's all I wanted to really say. The bottom line is we want to make you think, ask questions. The more you do so, I think the better your chances of understanding what freedom actually is. So impromptu question, Tom. In our current system, society, political landscape, whatever, how do we not own us? How are we not in control of ourselves? Yeah, because I think a lot of people inherently, from indoctrination, grow up believing that, hey, I'm in charge. I can do what I want, and I have to behave civilly or by these laws, but I'm free to do things. That's a great question. That was one thing I was going to incorporate, again, from this article from this fellow, Chris Sullivan, I believe. Yeah, Chris Sullivan, A Different Bugle. I just wanted to read a little bit of this because this is interesting. And I'm going to quote this next, 5 sentences out of his one of his most recent blog posts. He says, every time a national, and here's to give an example of what you have to say, and this is kind of an obvious answer, but I think he states it well. Every time a national holiday of some sort comes around, be it Thanksgiving, Memorial, Veterans Day, or some other, well, in this case, 4th of July just happened, right? We hear the usual script about how Americans are free and that they owe a huge debt to founders, veterans, or somebody for all the freedom we enjoy. This presents an odd definition of freedom. What exactly does it mean to be free? Is it possible to be free when someone has an irrevocable, unlimited claim on everything you earn? Some will object that the income tax is not unlimited. It's only, in quotes, he says, 39% or whatever it happens to be. But this can be changed at any time for any reason. Serfs, by the way, generally owed about 20% to the Lord. Were they free? Americans are so indoctrinated in the slave mentality that they will refer to someone who wants to keep the fruits of his labor as a tax cheat Our founding fathers probably would not even have understood such a term. Weren't all of them aspiring tax cheats? Right? Didn't they, in fact, not, want to pay taxes? Wasn't that it? But, he goes on, and I just want to, he talked about Marx and Engels. Karl Marx and Engels undoubtedly realized this when they made a heavy progressive or graduated income tax the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. I don't think many people know that. Anything short of abolition is adjusting the fit of the chains on the slaves, and he meant the fit of the abolition of tax. Right? Not only does the government tax income, just listen to this. This is very interesting. I think 2 sentences left. Not only does the government tax income of those living outside the country, it prohibits those who owe back taxes, and he has "owe" in quotes, back taxes from leaving and then he has plantation crossed out and says country. Nobody is free who has a master that has first claim against all his earnings. So my answer, that was a long answer to it, but, taxation is one of those examples. Why would the state or anybody else be entitled to a slice, whatever it be, some portion of your earnings? Right? So that's an example where you're not free. And again, I get the answer, well, Tom, I need roads. I got to have my garbage picked up. I need courts. I need police, fire protection, national security, which was, I think that was last week when he said, just think every time you hear national security, think the words government security. Yes, but if you do need those services, and maybe some people don't, who am I to say that everybody needs them? But if you make that argument, just buy the ones you want, and the ones you don't want, don't buy, which is what you do typically every day when you go to the store, or if you choose not to go to the store. So I guess that's my long answer.
Okay. All right. So that's one of our recurring themes that I think that is still, I think it's a very hard concept. Once you kind of get into what some of the examples are of where you're not free, I think it becomes easier to turn around and say, oh, okay, I understand more of what Tom's saying.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we've talked about that on this show many times. That if we do that too much, then people say all you do is criticize the state, right? So it's a hard line for us to try to strike some balance there, And really, we both would like to emphasis on here's where we need to go and here's why. But it is useful to point out the shortcomings of the state, and so I think people have to have a little more thicker skin when they talk about that. Say, hey, you can't criticize the state. Really, I can't criticize what's wrong? I think you should, but obviously emphasize on where we want to go, and that's what we attempt to do.
Okay, I think open-mindedness is an important value.
Yes, no doubt.
Or an interest in learning of another perspective. And maybe you'll, by doing so, realize that you really believe what you believe, or go, these guys might have a point.
Yeah, I have my doubts.
Yep.
And if I think doubt is good because it makes you reevaluate, and you should be continually evaluating your positions. Or I would argue, essentially it's a philosophy or an ideology. You should be looking at that. And I don't think it's acceptable to say, here's my philosophy or my ideology. I have a few contradictions, but that's okay. I think that is tough ground because what am I doing? Am I going to advocate for blue all the time, except for sometimes I advocate for red? How do I convince you to come to the blue side when sometimes, in fact, I advocate for red? And that's what we have here is a coherent message. And so I don't think that unless we incorrectly analyze a situation or something, we don't do that. And again, we're subject to errors. So if we make them, point them out. We'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Are we ready for some announcements, Tom?
Well, I'm going to do that quote. I think it's on here.
I'm sorry.
No, I'll do that because I think it's kind of interesting. This is from the movie Atlas Shrugged. And I caught this, I think, somewhere on the internet. I can't remember where I got this from. But apparently this is a quote from the movie because I actually have not seen the movie. But I think it's a good message is why I have it. It says, "You called it selfish and cruel that men should trade value for value. You have now established an unselfish society where they trade extortion for extortion. Your system is a legal civil war where men gang up on one another and struggle for possession of the law, which they use as a club over rivals, till another gang wrests it from their clutch and clubs them with it in their turn, all of them clamoring protestations of service to an unnamed public's unspecified good." Which really all that is showing the contrast between, I call it social cooperation versus coercion, right? That when people voluntarily exchange, I think so many people think, well, the big tycoons are going to have a big advantage, right? And no doubt, a guy with more capital, more knowledge, a guy's more handsome, who's funnier, who's more engaging, all those things will have advantages. I don't argue that, but those are nature's advantages by and large, or advantages that person developed. The political philosophy of freedom doesn't look to erase natural advantages. And in fact, I think it would say we'd rather enhance them because it benefits all of society. For, let's say, I happen to be a genius, computer programmer. I will make programming available, if I am truly a genius, programming available to people that otherwise would not be available for them to use. Right? So we should take advantage of those different characteristics of people, and that's what allows, I can't think of the word now, specialization in work efforts, right? You're really good at something. I might be good at something else, so you do what you do, generate wealth, you earn money from it. I do the same. We exchange goods or services for cash. Right? Because you may be good at one thing and I'm good at another. I think it actually enhances the economy and our standard of living by accentuating those good characteristics and traits that each person has. So where most people say, well, it's bad that you have some kind of advantage over me. I think in a free society, if you really stop and think about it, it's actually good that you're really good at something that I'm not good at, because I can now gain whatever it is you're good at in a free society. So anyway, I probably killed a dead horse there. Let's go on to the announcements, Brad, and then we'll continue on.
Okay, so thanks to our good friend Tanya for joining us last week. That was a discussion based on a variety of topics in the news and sort of a continuation of and a wrap-up of the discussion with about Anne Frank, Edward Snowden, and justice, kind of talking like everything is a crime. And it's one of those things that I guess I would challenge people on as a concept to kind of prove to some of Tom's points there that every day there are so many laws that are in place that we all do things potentially that we could break. And I think the point that we're trying to make is kind of taking the ridiculous to the absurd, that if you're breaking these laws on a day-to-day basis, that the authorities, government, otherwise could turn around and say, hey, we got you on this, we got you on that. We all break laws every single day. Yep. And there's no such thing as a law-abiding citizen.
And there probably is people saying, no, I don't. I'm like, really? You've never sped? You didn't speed once today?
Right.
Right. Think about
it. Listen to Paul on the Political Paradox podcast. It's at politicalparadox.ca. And who are these folks, Tom?
Paul is a member of the Libertarian Party of Ontario, and he has a really cool podcast.
Okay.
And I actually like his name, Political Paradox. And the .ca is because it's Canada.
Of course.
In case people didn't know. So anyway, I encourage you to listen to his show. He needs more listeners, as we all do, but he does it's a very unique, interesting show. Well done, well produced.
Okay, so it's Political Paradox, PARADOX.ca.
Yep.
Next announcement item is, of course, the upcoming 2015 AgriFest at Villa Marie Conference Center and Retreat, September 24th to 27th, south of Minneapolis area. Save the date. We will be there live with the second year in a row we'll be doing this, and with our good friend Nick Ludwig, who I bet we have on the show again fairly soon.
Yeah, I got a feeling we'll have him on, a little bit before the AgriFest, so he can give us a final update and hopefully get some people more interested in attending. Again,
All good, really good folks, broad, free-thinking, and if you show up, you'll learn something.
Absolutely. And be prepared to exchange to get something if you want. Well, I'm going to have a couple interesting items there myself.
All right. So Freedom Fest, this is something new.
Yeah.
July 8th till the 11th. Hey, we better get on it. We got to catch our plane now.
Yes.
What's about that? What's that about, Tom?
There's going to be a lot of political figures there. Robert Murphy, I believe, is going to be there from the Mises Institute. But quite a number of politicians, some fellas from business. What's his last name? Wynn. I can't remember what company he was with or still is with. Very successful guy who supports certainly a freer society than we have now.
Okay.
Interesting. Lots of different. Of course, it's a huge festival there. So they're not necessarily all anarchists, but hey, anything pointing in the right trajectory is a good thing in my world.
Okay. Remember that quote you just said, because I'm going to come back to that.
I know.
Okay, so check out our Facebook page, our own little plug here. Check out facebook.com/annoyingpeasantradio for a variety of postings. There was a couple of really good things that came about. Thanks to Tanya, Tim, and Cassie for their efforts on that.
Yeah.
Our next live show will be a week from tonight, Tuesday evening, July 14th at 7 p.m. Central Time. Welcome to join us, and we appreciate you listening, whether it's live or whether it's via the podcast.
Absolutely. Given again that just a few days ago we had a celebration of Independence Day, where did I get this? Is Statham is slavery? Freedom after fight. Statham is slavery is one of the things I follow on Facebook. And I just wanted to run through these things real quickly. Again, this kind of alludes to Brad's question. Well, show us how we're not free, because I think we are free, right? I think most people would answer that way. But
or that we're very much taught to believe we are.
Yes, that's no doubt. But so this from Statism and Slavery, he listed these things on there. He says, think about this. Celebrate the freedom. So here's some of them that we supposedly enjoy, right? The government has the right to take anyone they accuse of being a terrorist and hold them indefinitely without a trial. If you gamble your own money away, consume drugs into your own body, and rent your body for sex, you will be thrown in a rape cage known as prison. Want to sell lemonade, books, or any other product? Well, you need a license from the state first. If you engage in any peaceful voluntary exchange without giving the state a cut first, you will be fined, and if you refuse to pay the fine, you will be thrown in jail. If one included inflation, most of the income you make will be taken away from you and given to the state. Collect rainwater on your own property, you will be fined for doing so. If you refuse to pay the fine, into the gulags you go. The police have a right to bust into anyone's home unannounced. It's called a no-knock raid. You can thank the war on drugs for that, he says. If you try to defend yourself, the police have the right to kill you with impunity. Okay? And with impunity means they don't basically bear fault for their actions, right? They're justifiable actions. Want to feed the homeless? Because he's alluding to a couple of previous news stories. Not without a license, you lawless troublemaker. I think I added some of the swear words out of this. Did you cut someone's hair without a license? Think about this. Did you cut someone's hair without a license? Well, as long as you didn't charge them for it, then it's fine. But if you did charge them, for safety reasons, you need to get permission from the state to charge money for cutting the hair first.
What about a parent cutting their kid's hair?
Yeah, and if you charge them, I assume then you have to have a license. Isn't that crazy? Did you petition the Supreme Court less than 100 feet away? Into the rape cage you go. Did you hand out flyers informing jury members of their rights outside of a public courtroom? Into the rape cage you go. And there are plenty more where that came from. So consider what you were doing when you wave the flag and celebrate your own, these are his words, oppression. I encourage you not to praise those who have violated your rights and continue to do so on a daily basis under the guise of security and equality. It's pretty harsh, but if you think about it, there's really nothing inaccurate there. And again, that it's harsh because people, I would argue, again, are so indoctrinated, and when they hear something to the contrary, it seems very harsh to them. And admittedly, for most people that I talk to, even a few people that have, I would argue, have become liberated, had that feeling at first, right? That, wow, that's just out there. That's unduly harsh. And maybe there is a better way of communicating these messages. And boy, I'm very interested to learn if anybody has any thoughts there. But, I think it's kind of disingenuous also to try to blunt the truth to some degree. And I think everything the fellow has to say there is quite true, but interesting. Again, hopefully it sheds some light for some people. I think that's all I have on that. If you want to go to the news, Brad.
All right. So in sports today,
yes,
Tom's a big Tour de France fan. So am I.
Yeah.
But I guess today I hadn't caught the news yet.
Yes. This was happened actually yesterday.
Oh, did? Okay.
Yep.
So it was halted Tour de France was halted due to a couple massive crashes.
Yep.
And thanks for pitching me these names. Fabian
Cancellara
crashed and has 2 broken vertebrae in his back.
Yeah, and he continued and finished the stage yesterday.
Macho Tish.
Oh, I can't believe that stuff. Those guys are amazing. I mean, I understand that. I hate to see, this is a really tough thing. If I say they're all doping, well, of course, I don't know. Actually, I know none of these fellas, so I can't really say it. But I also can't say none of them are doping either, because, again, personally, I don't know them. But obviously, it's the riders have been plagued with this, doping. And that's a really hard thing for the guys, some doping and not doping. If you're not doping, you can't be competitive, right? Then you don't get your job, then you're out. It's just a very tough thing. But nonetheless, even if they are doping, even if the winners are doping, even if they're all doping, again, I don't know, it's quite a human endurance spectacle.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's crazy. They're going to be flat stages here for the next, 3-4 more days, and then they start going in the Pyrenees, and that's where things really get rough. But it's just, I just love it. And I actually did not see all of today's stage, so I do not know who won. But it was a flat stage, so I'm assuming it was going to be a sprinter. But I'll have to check that out after the show tonight.
There you go. Okay, so moving on,
Yep.
another great name, Tom, for trying to. How would you pronounce this person's name?
I've heard it many different ways, but Malala is her first name.
Okay.
I think it's Yousafzai.
Okay.
I think that's her name. Now, and and that name might not mean anything to most people, but maybe I can get it to them. As she was the Pakistani girl that I think it was like 2011 or 2012. Turns out she was shot by the Taliban. She was like trying to go to school or something like that, and I think her parents actually own some schools or run some schools or do something. But she was shot. I got this, here's from the report on Wikidata is on the afternoon of the 9th of October, 2012. She boarded her school bus in the northwest Pakistani district of Swat. A gunman asked her for her by name, then pointed a pistol at her and fired 3 shots. One bullet hit the left side of her forehead, traveled under her skin through the length of her face, and then went into her shoulder. In the days immediately following the attack, she remained unconscious in critical condition, but later her condition improved enough for her to be sent to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, England, for intensive rehab. On the 12th of October, a group of 50 Islamic clerics in Pakistan issued a fatwa against those who tried to kill her, but the Taliban reiterated their intent to kill her and her father. So anyway, I just wanted people to... I think that rings a bell with some people. Remember the schoolgirl getting shot by the Taliban.
Sure.
So the deal is, and this I did not even recall, she's the youngest Nobel Prize winner. Right, and what I'm getting at is, I think in recent months, she's been really advocating for education, and I don't argue with her. I think education is a fantastic thing, but here's the deal. And I happened to catch a CBS Morning News this morning, and that's why I'm commenting on this, because I just think, she's going to be 18 here, or she just is 18. And of course, she gets all kinds of speaking engagements, and people pay big money to hear her talk now because she's so famous, which is kind of weird because she's famous because she got shot.
She's famous because she really wasn't famous.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, she was in front of some conference, and she called for 12 years of free education for all children worldwide. Well, so then this is covered by CBS Morning News, and this is described as a bold challenge by the CBS Morning News. Actually, I think I have that here, and I wanted to play that for our audience here. It's just a couple minutes. Here's I can't remember the gal's name because Charlie Rose and other gal were not. Gayle King, I think, is the other gal, and I still can't think of the name of the gal. But here she is talking about what... her reaction to this gal, and I think there's a little bit of Malala's talk on here too later. This is like a minute 13, so here we go. Or maybe we don't.
This morning, education activist Malala Yousafzai has a bold challenge for world leaders. The Nobel Peace Prize winner is calling for 12 years of free education available to all children worldwide. She's asking for a $39 billion annual investment. At a summit in Norway today, Malala discussed how her time as a child is winding down.
I'm turning 18 soon on the 12th of July. And my life of being a child will come to an end. It's quite hard. But there is something that I have learned from being a child that I will not leave behind, and I'll take with myself into this new life of adulthood, and that is to dream. In fact, to dream big, to aim higher, without limit.
And as part of her dream and to sell the plan, the Pakistani teenager encouraged world leaders to be a child for a moment and dream bigger with no limit.
Okay, so, she talks about her that as a child she was taught to dream big, and her big dream is to have free education provided to every kid worldwide, and how the hosts of the CBS Morning News were gushing over this, and that this was a big, bold challenge is the words they use, of course, right? And so I had to be facetious because I just can't help myself. I said, well, I have a big, bold challenge. How about a world that consists of justice? How about a world in which people support the natural rights of all human beings and stop supporting legalized corruption, theft, and murder on a mass scale? Right? I'm roundly poo-pooed when I say these things, right? So then I got to be real facetious. Well, then why not? I guess I'll just, have a bold challenge and say, I think everyone in the world should have a free Ferrari. I got a feeling I'll probably get more support when I do that. Maybe people will start to cheer for me when I say that. But again, I'm not saying education is a bad thing, and we can argue over what exactly education is. But leave that aside for the moment. I'm not arguing it's a bad thing, but to just say here, I want free stuff for everybody, right? I wouldn't call that a bold challenge. I would call that complete pie in the sky and being devoid of reality, right? The only way you can provide it for free is if everyone supplies that service for free. Well, I assume teachers are going to want to get paid. I assume that people who build the buildings want to get paid. I assume that people that supply the heat and electricity are going to want to be compensated, right? I want the land where these buildings are, the current owners, I assume not all of them would want to donate land for all these buildings. I mean, people want to get paid. And I'm not saying getting paid is a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. Because if you, in fact, do get paid and not by violating people's property rights, right, through voluntary exchange, that means that what you had was highly valued. That's why people would give you a lot of money for something. And it's good that people accumulate things of high value. Otherwise, they might get wasted. So I just thought it was so, again, the CBS Morning News would say this is a bold challenge. And I would just say the word naive comes to my head very quickly. I'm like, you got to be kidding me that people would even say that. So I think everybody gets a new red Ferrari.
Okay, so I'm going to call you out on this a little bit.
All right, do it.
I get, it seems to me like inspirationally, ideologically, she's saying something that is meaningful and would be desired and certainly be the outcome of people having 12 years of education. Everyone having 12 years of education might be positive.
Yes. And
would it not?
And everyone having a brand new red Ferrari might be positive too.
I guess for the insurance companies.
Well, for you, don't you might not enjoy driving a Ferrari?
No, I think it'd be really cool.
Okay.
Okay. You're right. It is, it is a pie in the sky.
Right. It's not.
You've also taught me a lot about public and private education.
It's that it's just not possible. I mean, why even education? There's people starving to death. Why don't we just say free food for everybody? Right? I got a feeling there's a few farmers that are going to be a little mad if you say you can't charge anything for your food. And I know you could say, well, okay, wait a minute. No, the farmers don't have to raise the food for free. Everybody could pay taxes, and then that tax money could go to paying the farmers. See, so the farmers get compensated. So what you're saying is when I say free food for everybody or free education for everybody, is just saying, hey, here's the deal. I want an education. I want free food. I want a red Ferrari, and somebody else will pay for it. That's the world I look forward to. Right?
Sure.
If you put it in that light, to me it sounds completely insane. It's like you're completely naive. You don't understand how anything's produced. How many things would be produced? I mean, how many days would you go to work if you did not get compensated? Or people say, well, you still will get compensated. Again, they'll take away a huge chunk, if not all, of your income in order to compensate you. So the net effect is nothing. You are working for nothing. How many people will do that? Right? And I also call working for nothing, loosely, we could define that as slavery. Enslavement. Everybody should be enslaved, so I get the stuff for free. Isn't that the master-slave relationship? Right? This has to be exposed to people, this nonsense that people say. And this might be a perfectly delightful young lady. I don't know her personally. All I can comment on is what she said in this, and what I'm saying is completely naive, devoid of economic basis or knowledge. So it just sounds great. And I understand that's how you can get very famous. You just say these things that you know that society likes. But
it's very idealistic.
Yes. And I know we're going to wrap up here, and we got a little different story, but then we're going to move on to Greece. I'm going to just end it there with my comment on here, and I'll refer to Greece, and you'll maybe get the connection here in a little bit. But we have much more important story to move on to right now.
Okay. And what's that? Is that the subway story?
Yeah. Well,
how about that?
You know why, in part, I included that one.
Well, because it's from my home state.
Very good.
Yep.
Yes.
And he's a hometown. So today, I think it broke the story that Jared, the Subway spokesperson, Jared Fogle,
yep,
his home was raided by FBI agents beginning at 6:30 this morning. By FBI agents and Indiana State Police, and they raided him because he is suspected in a child porn probe.
Yep.
I did not know until I heard about this story, and I got several calls from friends late this afternoon that Jared has a foundation for juvenile overweight kids or something like that, right?
Yes. He has I don't know if it's called the Jared Foundation
I think it's the Fogle Foundation.
Okay.
And about in the last several months, 5, 3, 6 months, I think it was the executive director or somebody high up in that organization was also arrested. I guess it was in May.
Yes.
And later attempted suicide in prison. His right-hand person, or one of his top people, has been arrested and was, I don't know if they're guilty or not, but I think he's tried to distance himself from them, right. And now he is arrested been raided himself. I don't know if they're guilty or not.
We're
getting
I think replay, Brad.
From them.
You have your speaker on, I take it, maybe?
Yes. Been raided himself. I don't know if they're guilty or not, but I think he's trying to grab stuff from them. You have your speaker on, I think, maybe? Yes. Been raided himself.
Or is that? Hey, Trigger, are you there? No. Hello? Maybe that was on Trigger's end, not your end.
Okay.
I don't know. Because he was trying to add himself into the discussion.
Okay.
Anyway, I thought that was interesting. What goes on there, and again, early in the show, I talked about the instance of getting raided. Here's an example, and again, I'm not saying the raid here is unwarranted. Again, I don't know any of the background facts. I just more or less added this one because it had to do with Indiana, and I know that's near and dear to Brad's heart. But it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. Apparently, Mr. Fogle was cooperating with authorities, and to what extent and how long, I don't know. We'll see.
Yep. He's a bit of a hometown hero, and you just never know.
Yes.
I'm gonna kind of refrain from making any more commentary on this. It's just making the big news.
Yeah, it definitely is.
And I think it's on the national news sites and everything else.
Oh yeah, it is. And then I'm just going to break with where your docket is, Brett. This North Korean defector is an interesting story. I'll post this on the Facebook page for Annoying Peasant Radio because she basically reveals how she was, and she used the words brainwashed, but I'll argue indoctrinated. And it is so interesting, the use of words. When people in other countries become, I don't know, I'll say indoctrinated, we call that then brainwashed. Because, of course, other people are brainwashed when they think differently than what, I'm using quotes, we do here. Then, their differing view is written off as brainwashed by and large. Or, you can characterize them a number of ways. You say, well, they're ill-informed, they're uneducated, however you want to describe that, right? And that's I think, a way of putting down their view. Now, again, I'm not saying the North Koreans are on the top of the heap. But what I am saying is the words she used to describe her own quote-unquote brainwashing. And it's so interesting, and I thought I had to add this to the show today because given the 4th of July. And I think this is out of a quote from there. She says, but Lee and her classmates grew up convinced they lived in the greatest nation on earth, run by a benevolent, godlike leader whom they loved in the way many children love Santa Claus. And I just thought, wait, greatest nation on earth for North Korea. I'm like, I swear almost every one of us have heard that quote, but under the designation of the United States being that nation. And again, go ahead, sorry.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so think about the rhetoric that, and there's a TED Talk, and that I'll be able to put that up on the Facebook page as well that she gave. And to be honest, there's a snippet of that TED Talk on the article that I have, so I did not see the whole TED Talk, so I don't know completely where she's going. But another quote out of there is interesting. She said, "Kindness towards strangers is rare in North Korea. There is a risk to helping others," she writes. "The state made accusers and informers of us all." And I think a lot of people say, well, there's parallels to Nazi Germany, right? That they're accusers and informers. I think a lot of us learned that about history. I'm not denying that was the case, but they see those parallels, but they do not see the parallels today when I'm reporting people for violations of, I'll call them state rules, not actual crimes. In other words, if I see somebody speeding down the highway and I believe they were going faster than the posted speed limit, and I call 911 on them, they're breaking a law. Now, they could be doing more than breaking one of the state's rules. I get that. They could actually be endangering other people. It's possible. For the moment, in my example, let's assume they weren't. I was just standing, 50 feet off the side of the road, and a car went zooming by. Right? So I become an informer, right? In a sense, if nobody's harmed, here's a stupid question, what's the harm? Right? There isn't any.
Am I not looking out for the public safety?
Yeah, that's what people are convinced they're doing, but I'm going to argue that that's a great point to make. I would tell you that Ms. Lee and her comrades would say the same thing. I believe in the article it says that, I can't remember which, Kim Jong-un is there, and it was Kim Jong-il before, I think, was his father. And I can't remember which, but in every house, apparently you have to have a portrait of what our beloved leader, our dear leader, I think is the words they use. And if they fall in disrepair, you can be reported and beaten, you could be taken away, you're subject to penalty. So I thought that was very interesting, and it's an interesting story. She noticed she lived on the other side of the river was China from her town, and the one thing she noticed that, of course, she was absolutely, completely convinced that this was the greatest country on earth. But the one thing that did intrigue her was in the evening, there were lights on across the river, and there were no lights on of any of her neighbors and that she could see as far in North Korea. And that just let her think. Now, apparently people did get over to China, and eventually she did get to China, and she did get questioned that she was a Chinese question. She was able to lie good enough and convince them that she said that she was Chinese. By the way, again, getting back to our Anne Frank thing, I mean, the correct thing, of course, the law-abiding citizen would have certainly reported her because, right, she was a fugitive. She was disobeying the law. It was illegal to runaway is not the right word, and emigrate is not the right word. But to leave the country without authority, right? Defect, right? It was illegal to do so. And she did so, I would argue, probably at great risk, because if they find out that she's not around, I assume the rest of her family behind is subject to who knows what penalty, right? So anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing, given, the greatest country on earth, the 4th of July, all the patriotism that goes with that. And I encourage people to read her story and find out what happened to her. By the way, she did say in that, just the last thing, that public executions were used as a way to keep everyone in line. And again, I know a lot of people, I'll point these things out and people will say, well, Tom, public education, well, maybe it's the same thing, is not used to keep everyone in line in the United States. There aren't public executions. So what's the big deal? And again, I would argue it's not necessarily, I'm not having a difference in degree. Well, I do have a difference in degree, not in kind. That's the problem. In other words, I'm saying it's just the trajectory is the same, I would argue. Yes, they're further down the road, but I think it's dangerous to go in that direction. And not only dangerous, it's not sustainable. It can't work. And it's tyranny. Why even start down that road? It doesn't seem to make sense to do so. Again, we're going to reference Greece here in a second. But I don't know if you had anything you wanted to comment on that, because that's all I have. Again, I will post the article and the TED Talk so you can check it out yourself.
No, you're making me think about on one or two occasions, I've passed someone on the highway that is clearly not of whatever, not either they're inebriated or they have no business driving.
Right.
And they weren't necessarily speeding, but they sure as heck weren't coloring between the lines to a point that it was alarming.
They were doing it Pac-Man style?
They were. So would you say that by involving the authorities, I am being an informant?
That's an excellent question. And by the way, I'm busy right now. I'm talking to Paulo in the chat room. Here's the deal. The difference, it's not I understand when I use the word crime, people will flip out. It's really not a crime to speed. It's against the government rules. I get that. But what is actually a crime, and here's the touchy thing, is if I present to you or become a threat to you, then that is a crime, right? Let me give you a crazy example. And Paulo's just getting in on this, and he's going to go, this is one wacky conversation. Let's say I go up to town, the big metropolis that is Hayward, and I don't know, I have 15 beers at the bar in town. And again, people are going to say, well, this will never happen. But first of all, I probably couldn't get the 15 beers if I really tried. So they may be right on that. But let's say I jump in my car, and my blood alcohol level is 4 times the legal limit. And let's say I drive home, and I never encounter another vehicle on the road. So I don't know, I'm driving home at 3:30 in the morning. There is not one car, not one passes me either way on the roughly 12 miles on the way home. No one is standing by the side of the road, so they don't really even notice me. I mean, they may be in their house and they see headlights go down the road, and that's it. And I'd ask you, in the real world, is that actually a crime? And when I say real world, I should say this way. In a free society, would that in fact be a crime? And the answer is no, because I violated no one's property rights. And when I say violated, not only did I not violate them, I wasn't a threat to them. If no one felt threatened, no one was threatened, and no one's property right was violated, therefore it's not a crime. Now you're going to say, like most people will say to me, well, wait a minute, are you telling me that you encourage people to get crazy, sloppy drunk and to drive home? No, that's actually not what I'm saying. I'm just helping to understand people define what actually a crime is or isn't. So in your case, when you're driving, if you feel threatened by this driver, and it has to be, real, in other words, if it's really real, you'd be able to convince a third-party arbitrator that this is in fact the case, that you were threatened, and a third-party arbitrator go, yeah, I guess, with the information that Brad gave us here, it sounds, like, I can understand that you were in fact threatened. So that would be the definition there, of whether a crime actually happened or not. Did I answer your question? Did I lose you too, Brad? What?
No, sorry, I had you muted.
Oh, okay.
You did, and I figured that's how you would answer it.
Right.
It seems like there's a kind of a fine line there.
The notion is always a thing we discuss. It's property rights. If your property rights haven't been violated, when I say violated, it's actual violate or the threat thereof, right? In other words, if this is going to be a really bad, wacky example of totally politically incorrect example, just the one that pops in my head. A guy's a paraplegic. He has no arms, no legs, and there's a loaded rifle sitting on the ground next to him. If he says, "Hey, I'm going to pick up that gun and shoot you," when you can clearly see he doesn't have the capacity to pick it up, he can't possibly be a threat to you, right? Now, if the guy was fully physically capable of doing so, and your understanding of the context of the discussion was that I was actually I would intend to pick that gun up and shoot you or harm you in some way, that's a real threat. And I think it would be relatively easy to convince another person, a third-party arbitrator, that in fact was the case. Right? The point is, if it's really a threat, it's much easier to show. If it's not really a threat, it's very difficult, which should be the case. If you weren't really threatened, it should be really hard for you to show that you were, in fact, threatened. So,
okay.
Anyway, it's property rights, which is the thing we harp on all the time on this show.
Okay, so for the sake of the show, I think we should move on.
We're moving on.
Okay, are we going to Greece?
We're going to Greece.
We're not going to... I don't think we're going to have a very good time. Although Greece sounds like a great time.
Well, if we brought our own supplies, I think we'll have a fantastic time.
I think so, too.
Yes.
So what are we going to talk about with Greece, Tom?
Well, here's the interesting deal. I don't know how much people understand what's been going on. Well, obviously, Greece is part of the European Union. We talked about this last week or the week before a little bit, right? And they've been getting loans from the European Central Bank, the IMF, and I don't know who else from, maybe more players. But certainly the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund are the two main lenders in this case, right? And every time they give them a loan, because Greece is running short on cash, they say, well, you got to get your house in order to accept this loan, basically. Okay? And, of course, Greece usually says, yep, we'll get our house in order, but we got to have the loan in order to continue. So they're granted the loan, and now, if I have the numbers right, they have about $240 billion out in loans, and there's a payment coming due. Of course, they don't have the cash for the payment. I believe the payment was supposed to happen today, and I believe they missed that payment today. I can't confirm that for sure. But, there's this constant threat by Greece to say, hey, we're not going to pay, just give us the money. And, of course, the rest, well, I shouldn't say the rest, a portion of the European Union is saying, no, this time you need to get your house in order first before we even would consider giving you a loan. Well, so slowly what's happening here is, right, these loans are actually not loans, they're aid, right? Because if you don't intend to pay them back or you have no means to pay them back, well, that's not a loan, because the nature of a loan is, here, I give you some cash and you give me the money back later, plus interest.
Right.
Okay? So this is a deal where Greece has not gotten its act together. Not only that, this guy, the new leader, oh boy, I have his name written somewhere here, and I'm going to mispronounce it. And Tsipras, I think, is his name. He basically was elected on the platform like no austerity. And to them, austerity is cutbacks on what they call pension, and actually Canadians call it pension too, which by and large, and it's not exactly the same, we call Social Security in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
That, yep.
So people don't want those things cut back, right? And there's even many people make arguments, like Paul Krugman, say, well, if you cut the government way back, there'll be less capital, there'll be less spending, and the economy will slow down, so things will even get worse. So in other words, cutting them off doesn't work, right? But to continue to lend them doesn't seem to be a good option that they're never going to be able to pay back, because what's really happening there, some guy in Germany is working, paying his taxes. That money's being sent to a guy who's in Greece who's basically on a pension or Social Security that he didn't earn, because this may be more money than he ever paid in. So the question becomes, well, why should some German guy, some Italian guy, some French guy work to pay for the lifestyle of a Greek guy? Right? That's really the definition of slavery. Right? And these whole situations get very difficult to analyze for a number of reasons, but and I'll get to those in a second. But so supposedly that's generally the case, right? Greece wants more money. They won't undergo go the cuts or get their economy correct. And I would argue the only way to do it is to make it free. And I understand people have different philosophies. I argue they're actually wrong, and that's why this isn't working. But they want to continue that. And for the Greeks, just on a simple level, well, wouldn't you rather just continue to be essentially on vacation and have someone else pay for you? I mean, that's not a bad gig. I mean, things can get worse than that, right? The whole point is it's unsustainable. To get you to pay for me is only going to last so long. Either you're going to run out of cash because I'm going to keep wanting more cash out of you, or eventually you might get tired of going, hey, why am I paying for Tom to do his thing where he's having fun and I got to work to support him, right? The point is it's not sustainable. So I wanted to get to an interesting article by Jeffrey Tucker here in a second. And now, let's see, I'm not there right now. I got so many tabs open here.
I think the name of the article on the docket is Greeks Prepared to be Pillaged.
That's the one. That was written by Jeffrey Tucker. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. And actually, just so people know, his article basically points to there's a way out of this for these players, and it's Bitcoin. Okay, but I'm not even going to go that far in checking out his article. But he makes a number of fantastic points that I don't need to make. He says, in the world of banking, a holiday, in quotes, means you can't get your money, right? Because the government declared a holiday, and the banks are closed. Right, so there could be no run on the banks. It's been a few years since we've seen that happen in any developed world economy, but that is exactly what the Greek government is doing, starting now to stop a massive bank run. Greece owes the International Monetary Fund about $1.5 billion due tomorrow, which this article is written or released yesterday, so that means today, from the last time the government was bailed out. But of course, governments can't make wealth. This is a very important point. He says, but of course, governments can't make wealth. They're consumers of wealth. They're not producers of wealth. And the money didn't just magically materialize. They have to beg, borrow, and steal to get it. And Greece has finally found those limits. Right? I think that's a great line in there. He says, Athens had hoped that it could once again tap the European Commission, but drained and fed up, other governments refused to extend yet another loan to Greece unless they agreed to reform their bloated and corrupt welfare state. Unfortunately for Greeks, the ruling coalition in Greece swept into power in January. I don't know if unfortunately for them, because they're the ones who voted these guys in, but unfortunately for Greeks, the ruling coalition in Greece swept into power in January on the platform of stopping austerity, as they call it, and rolling back budget cuts. They balked at the EU's and especially Germany's conditions for the next round of bailout money. As a result, Athens has really and truly run out of money, and they will default on their debts starting tomorrow, which was today. And the European Central Bank has said it will cut off emergency credit to Greek banks if the government fails to pay its debts. So there's this game of chicken. But by the way, when the government declares a holiday for the banks, right, essentially, I think they're limited to 60 euros per day if you can get to an ATM that hasn't run out of money.
Right.
I got a feeling that the muckety-mucks in the Greek government aren't subject to that limit. And I just want people to think about that. You know, how bad are those guys suffering when the average Joe on the street, and when I say average Joe, this could have been a pensioner that pension money may be the only thing they have coming in, right? And that's the case for a number of these individuals. And there's a story, one of them I have here, and I can't remember which one I'm going amongst my tabs now. No, it's not there. There's a picture. I actually put that, I think I put that one on Facebook, and I sent it to you earlier. But it has a man who's trying to get a Greek man, by the way, who's trying to get the pension from his wife, and he's gone to like 4 banks, and he's actually sitting down crying, and the authorities are coming after him to remove him from the front of this bank because he can't get this money. He's financially ruined. But think about it. And most people go, well, that's too bad. This poor guy can't get the money to live on, blah, blah, blah. And it is too bad. I'm not arguing that. But I'm saying, look at what has happened. The socialist policies of the past will eventually come to roost. It's unavoidable. It has to happen. Now, it happened to happen when this fellow was in his lifetime, right, somewhat near the end of his life, and he now can't have access to this money. But again, when I say this money, it's actually not his money. If it was his money, he should have saved that money on his own account, and he should have rejected the state because he could have controlled his own destiny, but now he can't, right? He's continually trying to live off of others. And I have a hard time feeling bad for people when they advocate for this very thing that I'm saying. This is unsustainable. You are trying to live off of other people's money. It won't last. So, it's two things for me. Of course, there's a bit of an emotional response to the guy, but this is the inevitable conclusion to socialism. It's been well documented. I mean, if you have any impetus, pick up only a number of books. Pick up anything by Murray Rothbard. It'll be in there. Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. He wrote a whole book on it. And there's many, many others that have written about this. It shows what will happen. And this is, inevitably, this is what's happening. So I just find this is such an interesting case. I think he's now the former Greek finance minister, and he's also an economist, and his name is Yanis Varoufakis, I think, and I may be mispronouncing his name. But I just this is some of his description of himself. He calls himself an erratic Marxist. He considers some of Marx's ideas hugely influential in framing his thinking, and he totally discards others. This stems in part from his background. His father was a communist-turned-steel magnate who spent 8 years in a concentration camp under a Greek military dictatorship, while his mother worked for gender equality with the Socialist Party. And here's a quote from him. He says, "In truth, Karl Marx was responsible for framing my perspective of the world we live in, from my childhood to this day. It is not something that I volunteer to talk about in a quote-unquote polite society much these days because the very mention of the M word switches audiences off." Okay, again, Marxist, socialist, that's who you have in charge here. When their policies are implemented, this is inevitable. This is not an accident. This is, is it a tragedy if you drive a car 100 miles an hour and you understand that there's a brick wall coming up and you drive into it and eventually you're injured or killed? Is that a tragedy? I'm not sure how to describe that anymore because it's inevitable, right? If you're going to do that, and that's what I'm arguing is happening in Greece. Another fellow by the name of Thomas Piketty, he accused Germany of forgetting its own history, as Germany, in fact, lectures Greece, right, to get their house in order and say, hey, no more loans, right? And here's his argument, and actually I think it's a poor one, but I just wanted to make this. It's apparently a very popular argument, and his post or his story was very widely distributed and read. Germany, he says, had a portion of its debts forgiven before and after World War II, right? Some credit that for being the reason of why Germany was able to recover is because their debt was forgiven, right? The German debt. And Germany is one of the countries now saying they don't want to forgive the debt of Greece. They're telling them this, right? So this guy Piketty is saying, look at the hypocrisy here. Well, I would argue, of course, if you get yourself in debt and somebody forgives your debt, yes, you're better off. That's debt you don't have to pay. I don't argue that. But somebody got screwed in that deal too, by the way. Right? That part apparently is never really talked about. And I think that's very dangerous because now it raises the cost of making loans because there are bad loans, right? When people make bad loans, other people are going to have to pay for that, other consumers. So the cost of loans just went up. So everyone else is going to have to pay. So society is, of course, better off and runs more efficiently if everyone pays their loans back. But here's the deal. when Germany, I'm using that in quotes, says we will loan Greece money, it's not the German citizens per se that agree to this. It's the bureaucrats, the agents of the German government who okay this, right? In other words, they're okaying it. It's not their money either. It's money they're going to confiscate from their citizenry. And that's, I'm just trying to express to people how difficult it is to analyze this situation. So I would argue the German government has stolen money that it agreed to loan to the Greek government. I would argue, again, both governments, per se, are illegitimate. So, since they're criminals, a criminal gang of thieves is the quote from Murray Rothbard, and I happen to agree with him. I mean, can you cheat a thief becomes the question, right? So are the loans legitimate in the first place? I think you can make a very strong argument that they're not legitimate in the first place. And if it's not a legitimate loan, do you actually have to pay it back? Right? And that's what I'm saying makes this so difficult to analyze if you really think about that. None of the taxpayers in France, in Italy, in Germany, and other places gave likely their explicit consent to make these loans. So that means that money was stolen from them, was provided to the German, the French, the Italian, or whatever government, right? And was then taken as stolen goods and loaned to another party who engages in thievery all the time, being the Greek government. I mean, what a mess of, you got to sort out what's right and what's wrong. It becomes very difficult because it's so convoluted. Right? And think about it. It's the excuse that because in the case of the Italians, say they live within an imaginary line, an imaginary territory that is the state of Italy or France or Germany or whatever country you want to use, which is, by the way, the accident of your birth is why you're in there, why I'm an American citizen or a U.S. citizen, because, I didn't have anything to do with my birth. I mean, nobody asked me. And that's what people tell me, that's my consent. That's how I consent to the government. By the accident of my birth or the accident of an Italian guy's birth, he consented to these loans to Greek that they're not being packed back for. I think that's extremely flimsy, and I would argue it's not an argument. Right? So it's just such a big mess. It's crazy. I mean, there's another notion here that's involved that I also find very interesting to add kind of more to the soup. When the European Union was formed, it was really in part to be an integration, that represented the end of national tensions, right? We're all part of one big union. Instead of, you guys are the German guys, you guys are the Greek guys, you guys are the Italians, over here we have the French, right? All this stuff, that was what was in part attempted to end, and maybe not in totality, but to some degree. But look at what has happened here. You have pitted these countries more sharply than ever before. What I'm saying is the reverse of what was stated to be one of the goals has actually happened. That to create this union, will be better unified and integrated, is causing the reverse. It's causing people to want to go back the other way, right? I'm assuming, and I don't have my pulse on the German public or the Italian public or the French public or any other example there, but I would assume they're getting tired of paying for this, and it's making them more nationalistic again instead of broadening to the European Union. In other words, what I'm really saying here is I believe this is another example of forced association does not work, right? And I don't know how to make it any more plain for people to see, right? One of the authors says, instead, political and monetary centralization has inflamed national tensions, yoked the entire European economy to its weakest link, and substituted a political project for a currency. And now we see it as absurdly dredged up old World War II hatreds between the Greeks and the Germans. That was that article from Piketty who said, hey, the Germans should be forgiving here because they were forgiven before and after World War II. And I to what degree before? That was World War II. That was part of the reason for the war, I'm sure. Right? So I just think it's a very interesting amalgamation of differing battles. And I think, again, it's doomed to fail. This author of this other article says, let the euro fail. Let the future of Europe be highly decentralized. I'm all for that. And the underlying problem is, again, there's $240 billion in outstanding loans. And there was supposedly a payment that was due today of $1.6 billion that I am not entirely sure, but I believe was not made. So with that, I don't know if you want to add anything to the Greek thing, Brad, or if you want to move on to the politics and Rand Paul or whatever you wanted to do. That's how I kind of wanted to wind up the show tonight.
Well, I've certainly been following the Greek thing. I concur with your summary that it's unsustainable. Even their own pension program, their own whatever you want to call it, was unsustainable. One of the couple stories that I read talked about, the government, you qualifying for retirement, if you will, at the age of 50 or very, very, very young. So you could go live and have your own government pension at that very young age. And it sounds like it's all caught up with them.
Yeah, it works to sell that program because it sounds so good. Basically, you're saying, hey, I could put $2 in and I can get $10 out. That's awesome. I'm in on that deal.
Right.
The problem is the other 8 are taken from other people in order to make that, I'm going to use air quotes, work. Because obviously it can't work. But it can temporarily. I mean, temporarily, the government can steal enough money from other people to make it work. But eventually, it's realized that it's unsustainable. And again, I would argue part of this is certainly greed on people's parts, but others is lack of economic education. People don't, they do think, I guess they think stuff can just come out of thin air. Some people say, well, they need to devalue their currency. They need to debase their currency. Well, think about what that actually is. It means just print more money, which devalues, makes if we're using dollars, every dollar out there less valuable. So if I have $100 in the bank and they devalue the currency, debase the currency, my $100 only has, say, $90 worth of purchasing power. In other words, they just took 10% of my wealth from me. So when people say they need to debase their currency, what they're really just saying is it's just another way of stealing money from those people who have it. That's what that is, and I believe many people don't understand what's going on here, and that's in some cases why they support it. Now, in other cases, they can actually benefit from these maneuvers by the state, and just let me back. This argument of if they go into austerity, it's going to slow right. There'll be less government payroll, which will slow the economy down, and temporarily, it certainly would. I'm not arguing that. But if this is sustainable, if this is workable or it could work, we talked about this many times, Brad, with the minimum wage. When people say, well, we should make the minimum wage $15 an hour. And
which ironically, I've been hearing more rumblings of doing that, raising it again.
Yes. But think about it. I would call the people who call for a $15 an hour minimum wage as heartless. Let's have some heart. Instead of making these people get $15 an hour where they can kind of just get by, let's have a heart and let's pay them $1,000 an hour so they can live high on the hog, right? Why not make it so they can live fantastically? Now that's, really supportive of these people, right?
New Ferrari
for everybody. That's showing heart right there. Mm-hmm. Why don't they propose these things? Because they would be absurd if you just turned the dial up harder. You would see that turning the dial is absurd. that's central to what has happened in Greece. And I happen to be just picking on Greece this evening, but it's in many are other countries, even in the European Union, ready to follow suit, depending on how things go with Greece, right? And I don't know exactly the condition of Spain, but I've heard rumors that Spain, Ireland, maybe another one or two in there, are in tough shape.
Yes.
Well, if Greece comes out of this smelling like roses, in other words, they just given a whole bunch of money, well, why wouldn't the others that are dragging behind play the same game? Right? So there's probably a number of countries that are sitting on the sideline waiting to see what happens. So there could be more to this, is the point. Just then, it may not just be a Greece thing, and likely it isn't, in my view. But think if people were well educated about economics and what is actually going on here, I think less of this would go on. And of course, I happen to be a whack job who doesn't support the existence of the state in the first place, so the state could never engage in any of this chicanery. So anyway, if I've overly killed it, I apologize. If you have something else on Greece, otherwise let's just end the show talking about Rand Paul for a little bit.
Yeah, I think my final comment on this is I think I hear a lot of discussions, read a lot of articles, a lot of people going, okay, so this sounds like it's going to happen. What does it mean? What does Greece's collapse mean? And I don't expect. It's more rhetorical, Tom.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I mean, there's a number of different outcomes. Whether they remain in the European Union, is subject to question. And if they stay in, are their options more limited? Obviously, it's a decision they'll probably make. And if they think they have better options being out, I assume they're going to try to get back out. And does that mean they move away from the euro? Do they reinvent the drachma again? Do they print their own currency? The danger there is, I mean, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's essentially to move to decentralization. I think that's a good thing. But the problem is if those fellas, which I'm going to argue, that former finance minister, by the way, in Europe, he's seen as really cool because he drives a motorcycle and he doesn't tuck in his shirts. That was the thing I read. I'm like, really? So he has strong support, or he had, and I believe he recently resigned. There's a new fella in there. But, when they do this, if these fellas with these type of philosophies behind them, that at least that I'm aware of, well, they're not going to continue the decentralization. It's going to stop there, and they're going to get control of the printing press and have a monopoly on it, and they're going to just devalue the drachma if it comes, and it's. I think it's really not going to be any better. The bottom line is you have to abandon socialistic policies. They don't work. So, anyway, Paulo's got to go to the bakery right now, so I got to say thanks for joining us, Paulo. We appreciate it. Sorry I haven't been active in the chat room, but again, I appreciate you joining me, and it's always great to hear from you guys. If you do your show next week, Tuesday, I'm going to get in there earlier so I can chat with you guys. So again, thanks, and thanks for everything. You guys are great hosts, and I know you were saying something about spending more time with me next week. No, you guys were absolutely fantastic. I had a great time in Canada. That's something we talked about last week. Okay, so Rand Paul. What do you want to talk about, Brad?
What was your shoot? I just told you to remember your quote from earlier because I'm going to come back to that on that.
Yeah.
Oh, you're always after someone who wants to take things the right direction or something like that.
Yeah, the question in voting for Rand Paul or supporting Rand Paul, I mean, and he has some good positions. I'm not arguing that. Right?
I can't hear his comments and not think, wow, what Tom would be in favor of this.
Yes, I would argue a lot of his positions put us on the right trajectory, right? But I'm saying he hasn't gone far enough with them. And let me say, wait, as a politician, I don't think he can. I think, well, obviously his flat tax plan, I think that he made available, I can't remember how long ago that was, but semi-recently, is viewed as completely out to lunch, way out there, that he has no idea what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, someone who's maybe a Democrat today, and we would both maybe say, yeah, those are bad plans, but obviously for completely different reasons. a Democrat, a mainstream Democrat, let me say, would likely want more taxation, right? So because they may be believers that they're a beneficiary, or they're just supportive of confiscating more wealth from, because they think, a lot of times people think you'll get more penalized than I will, so I support that penalty, right? That's a way for me to put a hammer on your head if I want to. Mm-hmm. But so what I'm saying is, in a sense, he's on the right trajectory, but for me, needs to go much further in his debate. And again, as a politician, he's very limited. He can't go that far, and that's, part of the thing. Again, back to the main question of why not support Rand Paul. Even if you see him on a better trajectory, why don't you outwardly support this guy? And maybe the ball gets moving in that general direction as a result. In part, I think is, I'm very suspicious of the ability, the vote, right? We've done quotes here by George Carlin and all these things before. First of all, if you vote for somebody, I think they call it electoral voting, when you're voting for someone rather than a proposition, right, or something like that. When I'm voting for a person, first of all, there's no guarantee that person's going to do what they say they're going to do, and probably in large part you can pretty much say whatever they claim they're going to do, they actually won't, right? Because again, it's a lot of time it's a campaign, and they're going to say whatever they have to do in the campaign to get elected. Okay, so I'm not sure what I'm voting for when I vote. And even when I vote for somebody, again, just say Rand Paul, and he goes into office and he does something that I believe is actually immoral, am I responsible for that now? Am I responsible, as he is in a terrible, convoluted sense? He has become an agent of mine, but I have never limited his authority, really. So what if he does something that I find immoral? Am I now responsible for that? Do I bear some culpability for that, or do I not? Is it disconnected? Right?
I think there's an easier correlation for me with you voting for him, that if again you favor him, you say he's going the right direction, you vote for him, you're by doing so, you're aggressing. If he wins,
yes,
and he takes a given action, it could be anything.
Right.
You can't wear blue shoes on Tuesday. Okay. Whatever it is, that he's aggressing against someone else as a result of your action.
Yes.
Right?
So am I supporting the violation of people's property rights?
That's the point I wanted to make.
Right. So, and that's really a question. Am I? If he's by consent essentially an agent of mine, right, and that's understood, well then I am supporting the violation of property rights.
And I think there's people that are sitting out there going, "Oh my gosh, these two dudes are on crack." Because why are they even having such a conversation about voting? Because voting is a civil activity. It's the cornerstone of our democracy.
Yes, it's a right.
It's a right.
Exactly. It's a fabricated right. It's not really a right. The only things that are rooted in man's nature, again, are natural rights, which is, again, your right to your property, right, your self-owner, and all the things that fall out from that. And the obligation you have is to not aggress against another. And I would argue, if this is the case, if I had a reasonable expectation that Rand Paul would aggress against innocents, I guess it's redundant, aggress against someone, they'd have to be innocent in order for it to be aggression, then I'm supporting the violation of people's property rights. And I can't do that. My conscience won't allow me to do that. And I think the world is a free place if we hold to that. It becomes a tyrannical place if we don't. And that's my personal problem with voting, and I have many others. Okay? But again, even if you don't go that far, if you don't think about that, if I vote somebody in and then they turn around and do something that's the exact opposite of what, let's just say, I assumed they would do. In other words, I'll assume they were anti-war and it turned out they were pro-war and they started a war. Do I have culpability for doing that? And it does, in fact, all break down to property rights. But I think for a lot of people that it doesn't, or they don't have that understanding, do they have culpability? What if I support Rand Paul, he says he's against drone strikes, and if he gets elected, and under his administration, I'm using this as a parallel to Obama, and he drone strikes people that turn out to be, that we find out for sure were innocent, and that he knew it, right? Because there are occasions where they know that innocents will be killed along with the target. Am I culpable for that death now? Do I bear some responsibility for that? And I think people do not think that far, and I'm arguing that's not far enough. But regardless, you have to think about that when you exercise the so-called right to vote, what are you doing? And so, a lot of the typical answer is, I had to make a choice between the lesser of two evils. Okay. If you don't really love either person, and that still doesn't really mean anything, but assuming, I'm using that because it's common rhetoric, which means you still supported evil, right? You supported the lesser of two evils, but you supported evil. And people say, well, we have no other mechanism in place to change society. That's the mechanism that is given to us by the state. Well, first of all, that's what makes me suspicious, when that's the mechanism that the state makes available to us, right? Because I'm very suspicious of the state, more than very suspicious, but let's just leave it at that for the moment. Okay? There are other ways, and one of the ways is what we do on this show, is education, because, again, people, I believe, falsely, I'm using quotes, follow freedom, because it's not freedom, in a lot of cases, tyranny. They support tyranny, and I'm advocating people open their eyes to understand what this is and do not support tyranny, because the Greek man crying in the street is, if you're lucky, that's what it comes to. If you're unlucky, you wind up dead, right? Think of all the innocents over the years of the last century of wars. I believe the number's roughly 260 plus million people killed by the institution that is government in the last century alone, right? If you're unlucky, you wind up being one of those. If you're lucky, you just wind up broke and destitute, right? And you say, no, some people wind up in better shape. Yes, a lot of them don't advocate changing the system because they actually benefit from the way things are. And I wouldn't expect them to advocate for change because they're living off of your cash. They're happy with that. So, anything else that I should add? What did I miss from talking about Rand Paul and why? I mean, I'm happy to hear when he advocates anything that is on the right trajectory.
Yep.
I'm not going to stand in his way. I'm just not going to support him.
Okay. I just wanted to bring out that distinguishment because that was another one of those things I'm like, well, wait a minute. For me, it's like, he sounds like he's on our team. So
right.
why wouldn't we want to get behind him? Because the only way to do so is by being a part of the system that you are opposed to.
Yes. And only because it violates people's property rights and it uses aggressive force against innocent people. Those are my objections, basically. And whenever I object, one or both of those are my objection to anything. It doesn't matter if the state does it, you do it, I do it, someone else I know does it. It is unjust to do so.
Okay.
Wrap us up and get us out of here, Brad, if you would, please.
I would be glad to. You've been listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We are very glad that you took the time, whether it was live or via our podcast, to join us. Our quote from Rand Paul, the right to agree with others is not a problem in any society. It's the right to disagree that's crucial. You started with that quote. a few weeks back, Tom, and I really, really like it. I think about that often.
Okay, cool.
We appreciate you listening to us. Please tell your friends. As Tom always says, tell your enemies about our show. We'd love to have them listen and join us. We'd also love to have your input. We hope that we've provoked you to think, and please make your comments on our Facebook page. You can also private message us on there if you would like. Our next live episode is a week from tonight, Tuesday, July 14th at 7 p.m. Central Time. And here's the big tease. And it'll be a topic not yet determined.
Haha. Probably
really,
news items.
Really tricky. Exactly. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to our next discussion. Until next time, this has been the Anointing Peasant Radio Show.
Here we go. This is Goodbye Weekend. We're going to leave you with by Mac DeMarco. Good night, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Good night. Thanks, Tom.